The first question I had was, how did you get involved? I mean, because as soon as I saw your face there, so that's a Joe. Of course, I know some of the, I mean, no, I'm familiar with some of the other characters like Tristana's company. How did you get involved in this, Joe?
Well, that's a great question. So we're actually still working on figuring that out ourselves a little bit. I do know that the Exposure Labs team has developed out a large-scale impact plan, and we are rolling that out over time. We're working on, for example, we're working on questions that students can take into their job interviews so that they know what to ask companies to validate whether they are reasonable in their practices or not. We're working on creating toolkits and different resource kits for educators to take into the classroom so that if they want to screen the movie, they're not just showing the movie, they actually have activities and questionnaires and things like that to work with their students. From an individual technologist perspective, I mean, reach out to any of us. My website's beacontrustnetwork.com. We are starting to pull people in right now. We just launched our new version of it too, so there's lots of resources on there now. We're starting to put our policy proposals out. We have our software product launching next month. So yeah, the goal obviously there being, even if you don't directly use what we are working on, at least there's ideas, the policy proposals. If you don't like it, take it, spin it, put it in your language, reach out to your politicians. Like, that's a battle that needs to happen all around the world. It's really hard. People have told us, oh, I wish there were more solutions given in the movie and all this and that. And don't get me wrong, we thought about it, and we would have loved to have more solutions put in there. The problem is, and people who haven't been a part of a book or a movie or something like that often don't realize a lot of this content's about 1.5 years or 2 years old. People are like, wow, this is so new. This is so, for us, this is old, and we are now farther advanced, and the movie can't convey that. It's just not possible to record and edit and do all the up-to-dates live. But that's what our impact campaign is. So check out beacontrustnetwork.com, check out thesocialdilemma.com, reach out to us, because we have been in Congress, we have been in the Senate, we are working on policies, and we need help creating more people banging on those doors. So,
do you see this as an education project? Because I think my surprise was finding this on Netflix. So partly there was the irony of, oh look, Netflix's algorithm is suggesting this is something that Alex should be watching. And on the other side, there's your company, and I know a bit about you, and when I've spoken before, that you've always been an advocate for, like, wake up, there's something going on. Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to see how you position yourself at this critical time, and also understand that for some of us, this is old news, right? So, I mean, Shoshana Zuboff wrote her book about surveillance capitalism 18 months ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So what about impact?
Yes, it's definitely an educational thing. And I think, again, that goes back to, like, well, why didn't you have the solutions in there? It's because there's already so much information in the movie. Like, as a technologist, maybe you watched it and you're like, I kind of knew this, or I generally have an idea. But we didn't make it for you, no offense. Like, we made it for the general public, because I'll tell you, I'm from Nebraska. I'm literally home in my parents' basement right now. People here don't know almost any of this stuff. And we just made a film that went viral on the most popular, like, streaming platform, like, that was the point. We hit number 6 in the US, for the whole last week. And we got into the average American's household. And that was something that I knew when I left. I was like, if you want to break the internet, you need to get out of the internet.
Yes.
And this broke the internet while on the internet. And that was pretty crazy, So it's definitely an educational. It's I was just talking to one of my friends this morning, probably nobody in this movie is going to remember anybody's name out of the movie. Maybe Tristan, but the general public probably never will remember anybody out of this movie. What this does is this creates a foothold for all of us to stand in and move forward. And that was the goal of it. It's our work from here to continue to drive this message forward, to continue to work on solutions, and to continue to move the movement forward.
I think it's interesting that you said, I didn't necessarily make the movie for people like you, and yet what I got was first on WhatsApp, my assistant saying, "This is what you teach. This is for you." And then the next thing was, how do we relay this to the students that sometimes I'm facing when I'm teaching? It's almost like people with shields, right? That's the primary problem we have when we're teaching, right?
Yeah.
Let alone what COVID has done to us. I am always on the lookout to try and get people's attention. And bear in mind that I come from in almost like that old hippie generation, right? The Rheingold generation, or those of us who dreamt that information wants to be free, went and did PhDs about the blessed subject. And I think this is what I'm struggling with right now. I mean, at one stage, you guys start talking about tools, but it's not about a tool. And the algorithm is not a tool. So this is about behavior, right? So I sometimes feel as an educator, I'm going back to unlearning everything I knew and learning new stuff. And that's what I'm hoping. I mean, how do you reach out to 18-year-olds that sometimes I have to teach and they look at me and say, I know all of this, so what?
Mm-hmm.
What
I think a lot of times the younger generation thinks they know, and they may have seen this film and that may have been very relatable. It's very true. In terms of education, I'll say that we also fought really hard for free educational rights so that this film can be used in the classroom and you don't have to pay any kind of screening fees, stuff like that. So that was a big battle on our front to make it accessible and usable. But the thing is, like, again, I said this film, it is pretty basic. It is pretty like low level because there are so many people that are 100% like oblivious to this. We just needed to like raise fundamental awareness. But I think the things that we need to discuss even further, and I've talked to people in the government and in news about this, simple ones you could bring up, like TikTok. TikTok's a big inflammatory conversation right now. There's a lot of people on the left who say, oh, Trump doesn't like it because he's getting made fun of, and probably that's true. But also there's people on the other side saying, no, this is actually a really big national security threat. And actually that's also true. And the thing is, I am much more on the national security threat side. And then people are like, well, why is it a national security threat? All they're doing is watching kids make videos. No, okay. Actually, what they're doing is they have a giant platform that has the ability to run sentiment analysis over hundreds of millions of people. They can then understand what makes that population upset, what makes them happy, what makes them change their behaviors, what makes them do this or do that. So if they want to run a Cold War like propaganda machine, they can do it seamlessly. We'll never even know because they've already tested the waters. And actually, they didn't even test the waters. You gave it to them. On top of that, they have access to GPS location all the time because people are tagging their videos or doing this or doing that. Effectively, what they're doing is they're mapping with extreme granularity. They are mapping our cities and our infrastructure. They know where our inroads are. They know where our outroads are. They know what our weak points in our cities and our capitals are. And why? Because we're willfully just saying, hey, here I am, check it out. There's a lot of conversation to be had around this stuff that is not in the movie, and that, to be honest, partly we didn't put in because we didn't want to mentally terrorize the world. Like, some of this needs to be a conversation between technologists who can then, one, work harder to change it before it gets worse, and two, over time, reduce this out into the population. And educate and why this is dangerous, because there are a lot more issues that just don't get talked about. But we have to think about, when we make these messages, what can we say now that will be both understood and will click in people's minds, right? Because you can tell people everything in the world about what's going on, but if they don't pick up any of it, it doesn't matter. Versus if you tell them 10% of what you really want to say, but they pick it all up. That's what we're working with right now, So this is, again, like I said, this is a foothold in history that I think we all can stand in, and we need to leverage it to move forward and advance the message.
I think it's an important movie, or it's like throwing a stone and then seeing what's going to happen to the ripples. I think one of the things we're all struggling with is the usefulness of the platforms. I just literally corrected a dissertation now. Okay, and I mean, you will not believe this. Okay, I'll just read you the title. Okay, dissertation: Disconnect to Reconnect, examining the motives, strategies, and outcomes of individuals' temporary social media abstinence. So we've gone from something which we believed would make us free to something which is useful. Think of the irony. I was watching your film again this afternoon, okay, before I connected with you. I'm making notes. I was making notes on Google Docs. The more I wrote, the more I wrote, the more the algorithm got to know what I was doing, and it's starting almost writing the words for me. And at one stage, I just stopped. Okay, and I think we're kind of in this really interesting space. I think where the old gray hairs like mine who started to die, I guess, and we've gone from being, the pendulum has swung from one side, pure optimism, to almost sometimes, why, can I really disconnect? And I know I can't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this thing that we started at the beginning, what can we do? And I want to try and focus on collectively the activist bit of what can we do. So is it just a question of showing a mirror to society and saying this is what's happening? What can the solutions be? Because and I know I'm overloading this, Joe, but these are things which I face every day as an educator and as somebody trying to run a center based on connected learning. But what I know, somebody else.
And you're not wrong. And anyone who says, well, there's a lot of utility is not wrong. And I think we spoke to that in the movie, right? We didn't come out and say these platforms are inherently evil or that you shouldn't be using them at all. There were a couple of those, get off, but like, to be honest, I don't fully agree with that opinion, get off, because actually I believe it is almost impossible for a large percentage of the population to actually get off. To tell people to get off the platform is a very privileged position. Many people need it for work. I still use Google. My Google Calendar set up so that I can click it and I put on a Zoom link and I move in and everything's seamless. However, I also do things like, for example, I don't have any social apps on my phone. I only get notifications for direct messages or phone calls. Like I really changed the way I think about how I use technology, because at this point in history, I don't think we can actually change the technologies we use quite yet. I do think that's coming. And I think, and I know that's what I'm doing at Beacon, is building that future. And I know that every day we're constantly looking for resources and updating our resource lists so that you can see the most cutting edge things that are out there to protect your privacy, to give you alternatives to big tech, things like that. It is coming, but yeah, we're in a transition period right now. And there is a large percentage of the population that absolutely needs it just to function in the modern world. And so it's really, I think, almost selfish to say get off the platform entirely. It's like really not impossible. It's really almost not possible. Yeah.
I think one of the things which I kept on hearing in the film was the need for ethical design. And at the same time, this whole thing that, these things were designed by 30, 35-year-olds who are basically told monetize. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the kind of catch-22 situation, we're in, aren't we? I mean, the monetization game, what's ethical? And I think then on top of that, we're putting on this whole new COVID reality that we're basically starting to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's more about data literacy and digital literacy than anything. Because like I said, we're not at a point in history quite yet where we can leap from these platforms. So it's more about understand what's happening so that when you do see things happen or not happen, you know what's going on and you protect yourself. And you help educate others, and you can I leverage the algorithm because I know how algorithms work. I leverage it to make it achieve my goals in life. That's what happens when you can become data literate, digital literate. I think that's a big first step. I think another step is in that literacy, teaching people how to create these systems. There's a very rapidly growing no-code movement. I don't know how much you teach about that or have seen into that, but I think this no code movement is going to allow a large percentage of the world to finally participate in a world that historically has been a very small percentage of people. I mean, I'm doing things with like webflow.io, if you want to check that out, that I can build full web applications. I don't need an engineer anymore. I don't need an investor. You know, that's been a lot of the problems is you have people that they're smart, they're creative, right? But they can never express themselves. And even if they could express themselves, they're having to do it as a side gig while they work full time until they get an investor who's just a nasty money person anyway. And then that just drives the cycle, you know? So yeah, I mean, that's like our whole Beacon Trust Network. I funded out of my money entirely. Like Tristan has millionaires backing his nonprofit. Some of these other people have lots of money from being in the early days of the platforms and now stepping out and creating some side things. But, you know, I'm one in the movie that I stepped out at 27. I was not there for a long time. I was there long enough to realize this is not right and I need to get out. And I've funded the whole thing myself. I sold all my stocks to make sure there's no conflict of interest. Like, yeah, it's not easy. And I think that it comes though, I think that future that we're talking about, right? Where, well, where do I go? I think it's going to be created. And I think it's going to be created in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that that's why ultimately I don't believe Google or Facebook or any of them are going to crash. I just think they're going to slowly deflate over time unless they change their behavior. The problem is they just don't have a financial reason to change that behavior. So market competition might change it. The communities demanding more might change it, or you probably realistically will just have new companies pop up like we've always seen historically. That's capitalism.
In my part of the world, so we're looking at Europe, right? There's quite a big debate which is going on right now because the European Commission is proposing something called the Digital Services Act, and primarily it's trying to regulate much of what we take for granted online. The excuse was we haven't looked at e-commerce for 10 years. The elephant in the room is really all the stuff that you and I know is going on in the background. I don't know what you feel about regulation, because again, you can already see on one side, and I can totally get it, the information needs to be free lobby is raising its head. I've seen contradictions, like even with things like blockchain, for instance, where people said, you know, invest in the blockchain, and then you have GDPR here, which basically is at conflict with blockchain. I just wonder whether you think regulation is the issue, whether we, you know, or breaking up Facebook or whatever it is, or do you just see this as a digital literacy movement which has to grow and infuse first in the family, then in the boardroom, and then eventually in our education systems, and then it becomes our modus operandi just to question things?
I think it's a bit of all of it. I'll say I lean less towards regulation. I did suggest it in the movie, and I do think there needs to be regulation, but I lean towards the least amount of regulation possible, and that's probably a very American perspective of me. But you know, as something I tell people a lot when I'm talking about this stuff is, as bad or seemingly bad as the American system has allowed these things to become, the American system is also what allowed them to start in the first place, right? And if you look at innovation in the United States historically, new companies pop up all the time. And so I do see very much the possibility that a new company pops up and just, like I said, kind of deflates these companies. I do think, though, regulation is necessary. There are basic things that need to be implemented just as guardrails. You know, this is ultimately what a lot of people don't realize, because these companies are so big, is that this is a very nascent industry. This is a very early days maturing industry. It's only at best, 30 years old. And then you consider like actual social media and Google type platforms. I mean, you're talking 15, 20 years old. So imagine Coca-Cola back in the day, right? Like Coca-Cola used to put actual cocaine in their drinks. Like that doesn't happen anymore. Things do change. And it does take activism and it takes work from the free market. But yeah, I mean, like simple things, for example, I'm working on creating in policy what we're calling like the right to understand. Right, we have all these data rights. We have the ability to access, to opt out, to refuse sales, to do these things. But you know what? None of it matters if nobody understands what the hell is going on. And so, like, the right to understand is simply there has to be a summarized document at an 8th grade reading level, so it's accessible to the general public and to, by the way, 8th graders, COFA law, age 13, at which they can read. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to, but it doesn't even exist now. You know, certain guardrails like that we can put in these simple laws that force companies to be more transparent. Don't actually stifle their operations, but force transparency, and then allow people to have a realistic judgment and increase data literacy at the same time, right? So I think there's a lot of little things like that can get put into play, and we're working really hard on getting some of those. But beyond that, I really think it comes into we all need to start building better, and I think the world's in a bit of a state of learned helplessness right now, and it feels like we can't overcome this. But historically, things like this always can be overcome. It just takes a lot of work, and you just got to start putting a shovel in the ground.
I think this thing about it's going to take a lot of work, and I think this is where we could potentially conclude this little snippet. I'm really interested in how we can use the networks that we're in. So I'm in an EU network called Digital Education for All, or DEL for All. That's one. I run a center which has technically access to people in the Commonwealth. And a lot of those people are teachers, advocates, people who understand networks and want to help. And at the same time, I'm editing a book, which I really wanted you to get involved in. Maybe we may be able to do it at the final hour, which is looking at, the so-called post-truth society. And I think there's at one stage, I think you even mentioned that they'll look at what's happening in, civilized places like Germany, and then it's like there's this roller coaster of misinformation. Mm-hmm. And what can we do? I'm just wondering. I mean, you also talked about building things, and I'm wondering, as an educator, do I know how to build something? I'm in the business of words, or in the business of influence. How do we transition into building stuff, or at least if we can't build, get people to access those who can? I think that's the question I have at the back of my mind. And build ethically, I think, and making ethics not something which looks like something like your granddad can do. I think for me the most important thing for this film is that it's people of your generation fronting it, not my lot, the late 50s. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important. I think that we use, ironically, the existing networks that we all love to hate in this age of social distancing, because if we're socially distanced, we're going to use the social networks. So I think that's the catch-22 we're wrangling with.
I think you're right. And I think we will rely on those networks. I mean, I think you got to play the game to break it, That's what we're doing. My personal opinion, the reason why I created Beacon, Better Ethics and Consumer Outcomes Network, is because I am trying to create a foothold for the younger generation to do better. This is not me saying we're going to change the internet. It's how do we put a dent in the world that the next generation can pick up on and break through? Because I do believe it's going to happen with kids younger than me. I don't think it's necessarily I think my generation, I'm 31. I grew up with a floppy disk and with dial-up internet and all the, I hit that weird era where it was like it accelerated exponentially. I saw the very beginnings, but I've also seen up till now, and I experienced it all very, very deeply. And so I have a depth of history that those 10 years younger than me don't, but I also have a depth of older than me don't, and so I think that the build access, like I said, no code movement is coming through really strong. I do believe we're going to have a revolution in creativity in the next 5 to 10 years, because people won't have to know how to code to do machine learning, to do web application development, to do that. It's going to be click and drag. can be playing with blocks and building an IoT structure. Like, it's modern Legos, literally Legos Mindstorms. Like, it's IoT Legos right now, it's coming. And I think we'd be better off helping to protect as much as we can right now, helping lobby in law and pushing things in court to help protect through regulation. But beyond that, I think we're better off helping prepare the younger generation, because I think too many of us get caught up in I, right? We think as I, and we don't think as we. And realistically, we as humanity are just transient for 60 to 80 years over the course of time. And if we really want to make our communities better, we should really accept where we are and who we are, and play our best role in this to move all of us forward and work together. Get rid of the billionaire mindset and start to really work together.